Hey, let's get started. Good afternoon or morning to everyone here, depending on where you are. We are very excited here to have you here today, both the staff at the Shared Use Mobility Center and the panelists we have on the call today. My name is Nate Seeskin. I am a program coordinator at the Shared Use Mobility Center, and I am serving as the moderator for today's program. For those who are not familiar with the Shared Use Mobility Center, or SUMC for short, we are a public interest organization that is working to replace car-centric transportation with people-focused shared mobility to combat climate change, promote equity, and strengthen community. As part of that work, we released a paper in October 2022 in partnership with Lyft called Sharing in Action, Micromobility and Local Climate Strategies. Lyft has been a great partner throughout our research and writing process for this paper, and I just want to take a quick moment to thank them. As an overview to today's program, I will provide an overview to the paper, and then we will hear from Tejus Shankar from Lyft, and then we'll hear from 3 panelists who did a lot of exciting work on the ground in their own communities. We featured or discussed their climate action plans in our paper, and so they will talk about what's actually happening on the ground. In order of who's going to present after Tejus, that will be Alyssa Moodle from the city of San Diego, then Mary Nicol from the city of Chicago, and then Mike Salisbury from the city of Denver. After we hear from all panelists, we will host a question and answer session for the remainder of the program. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter that in the Q&A function at the bottom of your window. And with that, I will hop in and provide the overview of our paper. So just a few months ago, we released Sharing in Action, Micromobility and Local Climate Strategies. You can access the paper with this QR code we have on the screen. We also have it available directly on our website if you'd like to find it that way. In this paper, we sought to evaluate the climate action plans of different cities across the United States, and with that, sought to offer best practices of how climate action plans and policies moving forward can offer recommendations for how micromobility can be a tool to address climate change. As many of you know, micromobility in North America has evolved rapidly over the past few years. And from a study from the North American Bike Share and Scooter Share Association last year, nearly 300 cities have either a scooter or bike sharing system in their city. And there's also really great evidence on the positive impacts of what micromobility can do in replacing single car trips. We think that climate action strategies are really important because they are visionary documents for what cities can do to address climate change. Often cities are the most well-equipped because they are seeing the effects of climate change directly, and they have a lot of levers of power for how to address climate change. Unfortunately, micromobility itself is often minimal in climate action plans, and we want to offer some suggestions for how micromobility can be discussed more holistically in plans moving forward. And with that, we also do think that there's a lot of opportunities for micromobility moving forward. There is increased political and popular will to implement micromobility in cities and regions across the United States. And fortunately, there's also new federal funding sources that can assist with implementing climate action plans, namely bills like the American Rescue Plan, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, and the Inflation Reduction Act, most recently passed in August 2022. So with our research in the paper, We evaluated the plans of 32 cities across the United States, and we sought to have them be as geographically diverse as possible, whether it's West Coast, the Midwest, East Coast, and cities big and small. And we developed a bunch of variables to look at, and we grouped those variables into 4 buckets, which include modal shift, equity, infrastructure investments, and policy supports and incentives. So we had many variables, but we try to group these into these four categories to provide some simplification of the process. And so just an overview of some of these variables. Under the modal shift bucket, we looked at quantifiable trips. So does the plan outline a quantifiable goal for expanding micromobility? And diversion of car trips. Does the plan acknowledge a need to shift away from auto-centric transportation for as many trips as possible? In the equity bucket, we have one variable just called equity. So does the plan acknowledge a need to address equity, and is micromobility part of that strategy? And access to micromobility. Does the climate action plan acknowledge that expanding access to micromobility is an important strategy? Our third bucket is infrastructure. And so we discussed parking mobility hubs. So does the plan recognize that for micromobility, if parking solutions are part of the solution, and also mobility hubs along with that, and charging. So is charging part of the solution to expanding micromobility across a city? And our last bucket of variables includes policy. So transportation demand management, also known as TDM, is micromobility and transportation demand management, are they discussed as a strategy to address climate change? And funding sources. So is there an outline for what funding mechanisms can help to support and deploy micromobility? We also had some additional variables, namely, if these plans discussed micromobility broadly, bike share, electric bike share, and scooters. And so across the many plans, we scored each variable 1 or 0. So 1 is if that criteria was addressed, 0 is if it was not. And as you can see with the arrows pointed here, that among some of our strongest plans include Berkeley, California, Chicago, Denver, Jersey City, Los Angeles, Miami, San Diego, and Santa Monica. A perfect score was 12, and our highest scores were 9. So just a sense of how we researched and how we tabulated and evaluated climate action plans. And so now we can look at what some of the best plans said. So for example, under the quantifiable goals variable, Denver's mobility action plan calls for an 8% of commuters to bike to work by 2030. Notably, this is Denver's mobility plan, not climate action plan. And as we will suggest later on, we think it's really important that different plans from a city be in conversation within one another. And Denver is a really great example of how its climate action plan references to its mobility action plan as part of its broader strategy. For the diversion of car trips variable, Chicago's recently published climate action plan calls for increasing shared micromobility trips by 30% by 2030, and that can have a huge impact in reducing vehicle miles traveled. Under the general equity variable, Austin, which was actually not one of our highest scoring plans, but also made some really good points. It called for the creation of e-bike and car sharing programs that specifically serve communities of color and low-income communities. And under the micromobility access variable, Denver's mobility action plan calls for the expansion of B-cycle across the city. For the infrastructure bucket, parking and mobility hubs, San Diego's plan calls for the siting of scooters, mobility and transit hubs. And that way, scooters and micromobility more broadly can be an important tool for addressing the first and last mile issue of people's transportation journeys. Under the charging variable, as Mayor will discuss later on, Chicago's climate action plan recognizes a need to evaluate the effectiveness of e-bike charging stations in the near term. And the city of Chicago, in partnership with Lyft, has actually provided a lot of leadership on on-site charging for e-bikes, as both Tejus and Mary can discuss. Under the TDM variable, Raleigh, which is also not one of the highest scoring plans, but also made some important points, encourages employers to provide bike share subsidies in a mix with other measures like bike facilities. So we think that it's a good thing that bike share and scooter share is acknowledged as a tool for transportation demand management and should be acknowledged as such. And under the funding variable, San Diego discussed implementing in lieu fees as part of their development process and for funding active transportation projects. So moving forward, some of the best practices for that we at the Shared Use Mobility Center offered as a result of our research are that we think there should be flexible mechanisms to update language, such as having two plans in conversation with one another, as the city of Denver did. We think there should be expansive definitions of active transportation. Traditionally, that has to include just biking and walking, and we think active transportation needs to also include bike sharing and scooter sharing. We think that moving forward, cities should look to adapt language from other plans and should find inspiration from their peer cities and from peer communities. And this paper can serve as a resource for that in conjunction with the plans that we featured in this paper. We also want to recognize that micromobility is rapidly evolving and cities need to capitalize on this opportunity, whether that's through issues such as deploying more accessible vehicles or deploying stronger charging networks for electric vehicles themselves. And we also hope that cities moving forward stipulate that micromobility vendors provide data so that we have the best understanding of what impacts scooter sharing and bike share systems have in cities moving forward. So I want to thank you all for, again, tuning in to today's program. If you want to reach out to me, my email is listed below on the screen. My email is nate@sharedusemobilitycenter.org, and you can also reach out to me through LinkedIn. With that, I will hand the floor over to Tejus.
Thanks, Nate. Able to see my screen? Is that working? Awesome. Thank you so much to Nate and Sumsi for hosting this. It's really exciting to be a part of this incredible panel with Mary, Alyssa, and Mike. I'm going to focus on, first of all, I'm Tejus Shankar. I'm a policy development manager with Lyft, focused on our transit, bike, and scooter division. I'm going to focus on Lyft's tools and how we can and have supported many of our city partners with their climate agenda. So just to start, I wanted to give you an overview of Lyft and our transit, bikes, and scooter solutions. Lyft's vision is to build cities around people, not cars. And we've invested in developing a multimodal platform that serves bikes, scooters, rideshare, and public transportation within the Lyft app. You can see many of our systems across the country, and we're going to hear a little bit more about the Divvy system from Mary later on as well. This past year in 2022, our riders traveled over 92 million miles, which contributed to cleaner air by avoiding an estimated 7,950 metric tons of CO2. I wanted to focus on 4 major initiatives that Lyft has focused on around climate, around reducing the impact of climate. Leaving the car at home and choosing a bike or scooter is oftentimes the most sustainable choice for shorter trips. And to incentivize that and to pursue that and push that forward, we've focused on increasing and improving our operational efficiencies through station electrification. You'll hear a little bit more about that and what we're doing in Chicago, but we've piloted around 5 stations so far in Chicago to electrify bikes directly within the docks, and are hoping to expand that further within the network. What we found is with electrifying just 10 to 20% of our stations, it'll lead to up to 90% operational efficiency, which helps reduce the vehicle miles traveled from vehicles to support our operations and improve the availability of bikes on the street for riders. In addition, we've partnered with a lot of local advocacy groups around resilient streets and what they can look like to reimagine what spaces can be like to support better bike infrastructure. On top of that, we've reinvested into next generation hardware, and you can see here an example of both our next gen bike, which is that silver colored one that's on the streets of Chicago, San Francisco, and New York. In addition, dockable scooters that we've started also in Chicago. Our next gen bike has the ability to last for up to 60 miles without having to have a recharge. And so it's a part of a program to improve our operations and increase deployment. And it's an incredibly fun ride if you haven't tried it yet. And last but not least, wanted to focus on our bike and transit symbiosis. We really see bike share and transit as complements to each other. And that's also shown very much so true with the MBTA in Boston this past September during the Orange Line shutdown, where the city supported riders with a free 30-day Blue Bikes pass. And we saw an increasing overall usage of the Blue Bike system and support to enable both transit and bike shares usage together. We've surveyed riders as well and found that 89% of our riders have used shared micromobility to access transit. And so we want to be able to grow that pie in order to support more mode shift goals. In addition, you'll hear more from the other panelists and love to hear more on their takes around this, and really excited about the opportunities that are happening in many of the markets. For us in Chicago, we're really excited about the growth of the system and overall the station electrification opportunities that we're seeing there, both from electrifying the stations, but also thinking about new innovative solutions like solar. In Denver, we are one of the operators for the shared micromobility system and have seen tremendous growth in ridership, grew about 135% between 2020 and 2021. And we're really supportive of the city's policies to really grow the fleet in a sustainable way to enable shared micromobility to thrive, and also really excited about the Ebike rebate program that's been a really great success story. We're no longer located and operating in San Diego due to some of the regulatory concerns, but we really applaud the city's investments in bike lanes and infrastructure and think it'll be a great city for micromobility. But wanted to also focus on Washington, D.C. It's been a really great program for us through Capital Bike Share, a really strong public-private partnerships where the municipalities own the system and Lyft operates. And as a result, we're really excited to see D.C. call out Cabby as a part of their climate action plans and how we can further grow the system together through a strong public-private partnership. And I wanted to leave on that note around program sustainability. To continue the ridership and momentum of the bike boom, we need to further scale these solutions through solid, strong public-private partnerships. And what we found is the most sustainable solutions are ones both from an environmental and financial perspectives, those that have strong investments from city partners, either as an owner of the system or ones where they're established as a public-private partnership with limited operators. From a sustainability perspective, limited operators enables greater efficiency in operational rebalancing, battery swaps, including fewer vehicle mile traveled for the vans. And overall, we see this as an opportunity to both increase mode shift, but also decrease the operational footprint of shared micromobility. I know there are definitely want to acknowledge the challenges of a single or limited operator model, but we really have seen incredible growth in ridership and I hope to build on that success in the coming years. So thank you so much, and excited for questions later on.
Thank you so much, Tejus. We'll hand the floor over to Alyssa.
Thank you so much, Nate. Hello, everybody. I'm Alyssa Moodle. I am the Director of the Sustainability and Mobility Department at the City of San Diego. And I wanted to share a little bit about our micromobility program, but as it relates to the climate action plan. And I think we're on the last slide right now. If you want to jump to the first slide, please. You get a preview, we'll go backwards. So again, please, next slide. We adopted our climate action plan, an update to our climate action plan last year. And in this plan under Mayor Todd Gloria, we set a very ambitious goal of net zero GHG emissions by 2035. It really was around our engagement, putting equity at the forefront of all of our strategies and equity as an outcome of our actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, connecting those co-benefits of climate action plans and GHG reductions, such as air quality improvements, jobs, bettering of our neighborhoods and communities for our disadvantaged residents and historically underinvested communities. Within that climate action plan, we do set a mode shift goal, and that's for all trips. In our previous cap, we had just commuter trips, but for all trips, 50% in transit, bike, walk, or other emerging mobility, or a combination thereof. And that was really intended that as we reduce mobile source emissions, every mile, every trip counts. Next slide, please. And how we did that is shifting away from the car-centric focus that typically exists with addressing level of service in our planning efforts, policies around car through fare, where we can really elevate how we move people through our cities and neighborhoods. As you see here on the left, we have including a loading prioritization for our city. And that's really about setting those priorities for the most vulnerable modes first, walking, rolling, biking, micromobility, and then to those higher density modes of public transit, shared vehicle, meaning higher density of persons throughput. And then of course, the electric vehicles. So if you need to have a car, such as for service industry or people that need to move around because of care responsibilities, or just choose to use a car, that car should be transitioned to an electric vehicle from a combustion engine. But we know that that's not easy, and we need the right infrastructure to pair with that. And that's going to take place with dedicated rights of way for transit, electric vehicle charging, corrals, and charging for micromobility, as well as good, safe, protected bike facilities that accommodate all types of users and in the shared uses. Next slide, please. So a little recap of the City of San Diego's experience with shared mobility. We were one of the first cities in 2018 where scooters dropped, and they kind of came out of nowhere. But we were also one of the first cities to say, you know what, we're going to sit back and let the market figure itself out. A lot of cities needed to react because of political pressures or public pressures of significant prohibitions or legislation. And we saw that the market actually stabilized itself. You know, I think we started with 13 or so different mobility operators, and it pared itself down to about 7 to 9, and then slowly has evened itself out. We have actually gone from a permit system where operators would have provided basic requirements of insurance indemnification and fleet management to an RFP system. And we contracted, in that RFP, we proposed 2 to 4 operators. So we identified 4 operators that we let contracts out for a 5-year term. again, to hopefully get that diversity in the market and seeing the ebb and flow with scooter companies as they transition from technology or as they transition in their own profiles and marketing programs. We also identified a maximum number of scooters. We did a benchmarking of 32 cities nationwide to look at what are all these different metrics that we can learn from to identify what's right for our city. So we used a vehicle per population, per 1,000 population, and came up with, between that and our own experience, 8,000 devices maximum was kind of the sweet spot for the city of San Diego. It really provided for those high demand times during a tourist and seasonal, like the summertime, and on those winter breaks where maybe people are escaping the snowier areas and coming for the West Coast, but also still didn't get too out of control, where we could see operators were able to manage their fleets respectfully. We also had data management requirements, so making sure that we had the data to help to partner with those operators to find that, again, that sweet spot of demand and supply on our streets, and then focused around an equity program. One other thing that we did was we set our pricing to incentivize that daily decision-making by the operators. So they pay via invoice at the end of the month for every day every scooter is on the street. So if it is raining out, and it does rain here in San Diego, then they can pull those devices and not be charged for that day. And then we don't have devices sitting around and in the way of any cleanup crews that might need to be out there for flood control or other rainy day issues. And we just don't have idle devices sitting around our streets. We also established a way for people, the public, to provide feedback through a application called Get It Done. And you can go in and register information about non-compliance in the Get It Done app. And then we can take that back and follow up with our third-party vendor who helps us with that management sweep to go out and maintain the city streets and help to return scooters and bikes to corrals and bike racks. Next slide, please. So elaborating a little bit more on some of our regulations, and I know that Tejus mentioned that Lyft is not in this market right now because of some of those requirements. I think that there is all a timing matter, but we do have some requirements for sidewalk detection technology, and we're seeing that very successfully being implemented here. It's coming up in different types: geofencing, a visual eye sidewalk detection, also using your MDS data feed to validate that information. We've also included requirements for labeling of age verification on the device itself, as well as within the app, requiring only one shared mobility device per person. That way, the user is getting that interface with any safety protocols or unique City of San Diego requirements when they log in to use the scooter or the bike. We do require that all parking and riding be done off the sidewalk, so in our public rights of way. And we've identified and created corrals across our city. And we continue to install hundreds of corrals on a pretty regular basis to allow for the deployment of scooters and bikes in all of our communities, including our communities that have been historically underinvested in and where people might be using transit more as a need and necessity. Next slide, please. So we have been getting performance data around our scooter usage from the last year, and with the deployment of our new contract system. And we already have over 371,000 trips. We see that the trip distance is about 1 mile. That's gone down a little bit since pre-COVID, where we saw about 2 to 3 miles were the average. So we know that micromobility really fits into that niche of the ecosystem of mobility options. It's not going to replace a long car drive, but it definitely can replace those smaller trips. Sometimes a TNC would have taken people from their house to a restaurant or to to one of our public facilities. Average trip duration is 13 minutes. And then it's great, we are able to calculate the CO2 reduction from the use of those trips, using some standard practice from our vendor Populous, who has done additional research about what scooter trips or the percentage of scooter trips that would replace a car trip. Next slide, please. This is a little small on your screen, but I just wanted to share here, pairing up with those third-party vendors, or if you have that capability within your city or municipality to do data management. It's so terrific and so empowering, not just to the city, but to the operators, to be able to understand what the operations look like on a day-to-day, weekly, monthly basis. So you can see those trends and really tackle the management of scooters together and collaboratively. And then to provide for those data points and KPIs to ensure that you are truly using this mobility, the sustainable mobility, to offset your greenhouse gas emissions in compliance with climate action plans. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we do as a city need to also provide for that supportive infrastructure. And that is around, for us, our corrals. You see in the picture in your screen, the example of what our corrals look like. They're just paintings. Sometimes they are even less improved than that, with just some general markings, but where our engineers and planners have gone out to ensure it's in a safe location. The smaller screenshot is the location of all of our corrals in the entire city. So you can see they're spread out in our more urbanized areas, and we are continuing to expand that right now. And we are complementing our new separated bike facilities that we are putting in our Class 4 facilities, our buffered bike lanes, and pairing those corral facilities with the bike facilities. Lastly is really recognizing that has to be a balancing of enforcement and partnership. So recognizing that scooters are part of the solution, bikes are part of the solution. I mean, we heard that at COP27, that micromobility has to be part of the ways that we address mobile source emissions. We need to work on how do you enforce, but yet still be a partner. And we continue to work with our operators daily and our third-party contractor to really find that, that nice partnership to work on increasing the mobility options, and not just taking away a mobility option and substituting it, but really making them more sustainable and safe. Next slide. So in summary, really our focus as it relates to the climate action plan, and here's a map here that we created of a climate equity index for the city of San Diego. The darker green is our areas where climate equity is less experienced, and the lighter areas and blue areas are where you find more disparities from underinvestment, from environmental justice issues, and other factors related to disadvantaged communities. So we're really targeting that climate equity. Safety and access to sustainable modes is really important. So pairing, again, corrals and bike lanes in all of our communities to make sure our regional connections as well as our neighborhood connections work for riders of all ages and abilities. Shifting the modes, so pairing that with transit being a real key component, and the infrastructure and partnership to have a successful program. Next slide. And with that, that's the conclusion of my presentation, and I'm excited to answer any questions and to hear from my colleagues, Mary and Mike from the other cities. Thank you so much, Nate.
Thank you, Alyssa. I will hand the floor over to Mary.
Excellent. Thank you. And thanks, Colin, for taking control of my slides.
Let me just grab that. Yep.
Sure. As those get up, I'll introduce myself. So Mary Nicol, I'm the Director of Policy with the Chicago Department of Transportation. And a large part of my portfolio is to work on policies and programs that reduce emissions from the transportation sector. So I'm excited to talk with you today just about how we think about shared micromobility as a part of our 2022 climate action plan, but as well as how really our emission reduction strategy for the transportation sector has to do with mode shift. But before we dive into that, just wanted to name that all of the strategies and programs that we're prioritizing are grounded in the department's commitment to mobility justice. In 2021, CDOT released its revised strategic plan, and it recognizes that in Chicago, Black and Brown communities have fewer mobility choices, longer commute times, the highest concentration of industrial centers and truck traffic in their neighborhoods, and experience worse air quality. And so a big part of our effort here is to make sure that we're making safe, affordable transportation options for residents that don't center around needing to own a car to get around the city. In developing the strategic plan, we partnered with some local community and advocacy groups that are known as the Transportation Equity Network. And I think they provided a quote, the best vision, when I think about what we're trying to do in a visual way of thinking about building a transportation system that does not require car ownership. That is what helps me envision what we're trying to get done. So if you move to the next slide, this talks about our climate strategy overall. And I apologize, I gave you the wrong cue, Colin. I'll get better about that. But our climate strategy overall is to cut emissions 62% by 2040. And so that's citywide. And a lot of the strategies that we talked about do it in a way that, reduce emissions, but as well as deliver local benefits at the same time. If you look at the distribution of emissions in Chicago, on-road transportation emissions make up around 15% of overall citywide emissions. And similar to other dense urban areas, the majority of the emissions, around 70%, come from the building sector. So just to give you a sense of scale. If you move on to the next slide, we'll dig in a bit to the specific strategies that we identify in the climate action plan as it relates to shared micromobility. So overall, our vision with this piece of work is to deliver a micromobility network that, yes, reduces emissions, but as well as connects communities and improves air quality. So as I said, we know that on-road transportation accounts for about 15% of total citywide greenhouse gas emissions. And so we know that reducing these emissions will require that Chicagoans travel fewer miles in cars, in combustion vehicles, and shift to lower emission transportation options like walking, biking, transit, or shared micromobility. And so there's a variety of strategies that we specifically we lay out that get to reducing emissions, but specifically if we look at what we're doing in regards to micromobility, one, we felt like it was important to set a mode shift goal. That's not something that the city has ever done before. So to use that, folks who look at transportation data know that it's really difficult to get a exact mode of transportation data. But what we use is we use the 2019 census data that showed for commute to work trips, around 36% for Chicagoans were via walking, biking, taking transit, or shared micromobility. And so our goal by 2040 is for all trips, not just commute trips, to reach 45% of walking, biking, taking transit for those trips. We want to increase divvy bikes and shared micromobility trips 30% by 2030. And then, of course, we want to make sure that as well as increasing the usage of those modes, making sure the infrastructure keeps pace with those investments. So expanding high quality and low stress bikeways and off-street trails. You go to the next slide. I'm now going to move into, I was talking at a high level, some of the strategies that guide the work that we're doing in terms of climate and mode shift, but specifically want to talk about some of the programs and operational changes that we've implemented to help us get there. So this last year, we launched Bike Chicago, And the main goal with Bike Chicago is to provide affordable, low carbon mobility option to residents. We overall, the goal is to distribute 5,000 free bikes and safety equipment. When I say safety equipment, I mean locks, bells, lights, helmets, the whole package to be safe riding in the city, and distribute 5,000 packages of those by 2026. We saw an immense response. In just course of a few weeks, we generated 19,000 applications from Chicagoans from every neighborhood in the city. And so what it showed us is not only is there a need to provide affordable mobility to residents, but there's a demand. And so over the course of 4 months in 2022, we distributed 500 bikes to residents. And so for folks who know how difficult government procurement processes can be, we're pretty proud of making that happen in the course of 4 months. And we're expanding the program to distribute 1,000 bikes in 2023. The eligibility criteria is listed there. Happy to field more questions about that, but as well as you can learn more about the program at the website, chicago.gov/bikechicago. Moving on to the next slide. So specifically with our shared micromobility program, we're targeting reducing short distance single passenger car trips. So Divvy as a system had docked bikes and e-bikes, and then this year introduced scooters into the same docking system. So this is the first in the nation dock scooter program that fits within the current bike share program. Since the launch in May of last year, dock scooters saw nearly 700,000 rides. Since the inception, about 60% of those scooter trips ended in a station, and 78% of trips have started or ended at a station. And so one of the things that we're taking from the program is that we're seeing that it has shown how leveraging the footprint of existing docking stations, we can broaden shared micromobility to another mode. Next slide. So obviously shared micromobility isn't carbon free. There are lots of moving around of the bikes and scooters to meet where the beginning destinations are for residents. So we really wanted to partner with Lyft to look at how we can green the operational piece of it. So there are 2 programs in work in that regard. And both working to reduce operational VMT and as well as increase bike utilization. So to give you a sense of scale, in 2022, system-wide, both scooters and bikes, there were about 6.4 million rides were taken on Divvy. And in 2022, on the left, you can see we rolled out an electrified charging station. So when the bike is secure in the station, it looks exactly like another station, but hopefully the lightning bolt indicates that there's electricity flowing. And we're currently piloting 5 of those stations. The plan is to electrify over 100 stations over the next few years. And what we've seen is that this enables Lyft, our operator, to use fewer van trips to swap batteries, cutting the associated carbon emissions. And as was stated earlier, initial estimates forecast just with 15% of stations electrified by the Divvy network, it will improve both rider accessibility of e-bikes as well as increase Divvy's operational efficiency by up to 80% or more. We're in the process, on the right, you can see a solar charger. We're in the process of figuring out how to pilot those. This would enable us to identify a path to powering stations without connecting to the grid while using alternative and more sustainable power source. If folks may know how difficult it is to start digging in a city and ripping on concrete, so operationally this is really appealing. And so we're currently looking at this as a method and trying to identify ways to get enough sun exposure in a dense urban center with lots of tree cover and tall buildings in order for it to operationally work. So I'll pause there, and I'm happy to take any questions and hand it over to my colleague from Denver.
Thank you, Mary. And Mike, take it away.
All right, let's see if I can successfully share my screen. Where did my presentation go? So while I am trying to do this, my name is Mike Salisbury. I work in the city and county of Denver in our Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. Let's see, it looks like it's coming up. Is everyone seeing my screen? Just want to make sure before I start yammering.
All good, Mike.
Excellent, thank you very much. So I work on, I work on anything around electrified mobility. So kind of trying to electrify everything with wheels, from buses to microtransit to cars to bikes, scooters, things like that. So just I'll kind of quickly go through just a little bit of background on my office, just so we have the context for that. So we are a relatively new office. We're just formed in 2020, but really our goal is to quickly and equitably reduce greenhouse gases, and do that with urgency to meet our greenhouse gas targets. In 2021, we updated our target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 65% by 2030, and then to reduce them completely by 2040. So very aggressive climate goals. And my work is kind of how to do that in the transportation space. So we are really lucky in the city of Denver, and also in 2020, Denver residents passed the Climate Protection Fund. This is a sales tax measure that provides dedicated funding for my office's climate work. So transportation is one of the buckets of funding that we have, but there's others: renewables, adaptation, justice, workforce, buildings. So a lot of other programs that are working to both mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, but also that whole ecosystem of resiliency and adaptation, and environmental justice, and equity. Equity is a really important focus of our office. So the Climate Protection Fund bill that the voters passed require that at least 50% of the funding that we invest with the Climate Protection Fund goes towards equity-focused projects, or projects really need to have that baseline. Are we improving equity in the city? So I like to say my goals are reducing greenhouse gases, improving mobility, and while doing that, improving mobility options, especially for under-resourced Denver neighborhoods. And let's see. So kind of just quickly on the city's goals in this space, you can see we have a goal of 30% vehicles that are registered in the city be electric by 2030. Comes out to about 150,000 vehicles. We're about 12,000 today, so got a lot of work to do over the next 7 years. To do that, we need a lot of extra charging stations. So that's just another Lyft part of the work that we do in the city, is trying to figure out how to get more charging stations on the ground to support that. We also have the mobility goals. Nate talked about this. We try to link these two goals, like trying to increase the mode share for sustainable transportation and active transportation modes. So again, a lot of work to be done in this space as well, but we really try to make those complementary. So, at the end of the day, it's much easier to meet our vehicle electrification goals if there's less vehicles on the road. That changes that denominator of what we need, the total number of vehicles. So the more we can do to reduce vehicle ownership, vehicle trips, it makes it easier to electrify those remaining trips with electric vehicles, for those trips that maybe aren't as well suited to micromobility modes. We really have to do it all in order to meet our climate goals. If you look at the modeling, like we can do a chunk of it with electric vehicles. That's great. It's a really important part of our climate work. But to have any hope of really getting those goals, we do need to aggressively go after mode share and reducing vehicle miles traveled as much as possible. So, I really liked Alyssa was talking about this kind of ecosystem of shared micromobility. And that's what I kind of want to touch on here, is that there's a lot of different ways to get micromobility options into the hands of Denver residents. So as was mentioned, Tejus mentioned, we have Lyft and Lime bikes and scooters in the city. So that's a really big part. And I don't lead that program, so I'm not going to talk authoritatively about the shared micromobility program, but it's a really critical part of that ecosystem. So we have lots of shared e-bikes and scooters in the city being deployed. We also have projects around Ebike Libraries. So giving residents access to free e-bikes at locations that are convenient to them. And then we have as well the individual ownership. So we have an incentive program for e-bikes in the city of Denver that's been really successful and a really exciting program over the last year. And I just think that all these uses, all these different types of micromobility can serve different cases. I don't really think they're competing with each other for the most part. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a future slide. So just a couple details on Ebike Libraries. We started to deploy these in 2021. There's about 70 e-bikes, 2 models. One is located at community-based organizations. So organizations that are already serving Denver residents, providing services to the community. They're well-known, people go there for other things. So that's where those e-bikes live. People can check them out for a day, a week at a time. They're free of use. So that's one model. The other model is deploying them at kind of affordable housing developments. So instead, there's like maybe 3 or 4 e-bikes at one affordable housing development. Again, people can check them out. So we're really trying to look at both those models to see, does one work better than the other? Do we see higher ridership? How does it all work? So lots of interesting details at the 2 different types of locations. And so we're learning a lot about that to understand how people are using them. And I think these are really focused, again, in kind of our under-resourced areas where it's been a lot more challenging for the shared micromobility operators, I think, are expanding into these areas, but they're not in there as much as, say, they are in the central business district of downtown. So that's something that's good to see, provide these libraries into areas that don't have as much of the shared micromobility access. So the e-bike voucher, super quickly, it launched last year on Earth Day. These are the dollar figures for the rebates. It's a point of sale rebate. So upfront, that was really important for us because, especially for income qualified residents, there was not really the ability to front that kind of money. So that was a really important part of the program. And it was important because we also, making an upfront rebate made us really have to focus on the relationship with the bike shops who were selling the bikes. They had to be willing to kind of front that money for a short period of time until they could be reimbursed by the city, because the residents were not really able to bear the burden of waiting for a reimbursement from the city. So we really tried to keep everything as simple as possible. The application is simple. The processing for the bike shops is simple, to really try to make it as easy as possible and accessible as possible for Denver residents. So pretty exciting. We started and we launched with about 9 participating bike shops in the city. We're now up to over 30 bike shops. So a lot of interest in that. And then I think, as like Mary was saying about Chicago, the demand for this has kind of gone beyond our expectations. So in 2022, we started, when we launched the program, we thought, hey, if we spend about $250,000 on this program in 2022, great. We've moved the needle a little bit. So by the end of the year, last year, we spent almost $5 million providing vouchers to Denver residents. Had way more demand and interest in the program than we had funding for. I think we had almost 10,000 applications. We have about 15,000 people on our email list who are interested in the rebates. And I think points that are really important I wanted to highlight here is that we were able to have almost half the bikes go to income qualified residents. And because of that larger incentive amount, that means 2/3 of the funding went to support the income qualified residents. Then I think they're replacing car trips. So we're seeing that we did surveys to participants and we're replacing about 26 miles of trip. They're making 26 miles of trips on their e-bikes each week, replacing about 3.5 vehicle trips. So we are seeing some really great mobility, but also greenhouse gas benefits coming from this program. Just wanted to, I think, again, going back to this idea that ecosystem is on the right here, you see where the shared micromobility is being deployed. The downtown is that dark purple area you're seeing in the middle. Then the left is where the people who redeemed e-bike vouchers live. And what I think, one piece I think this helps us show is that, again, the shared micromobility, I think, works really, really well, especially in downtown, replacing slightly shorter trips. We see in Denver, I think the average shared e-bike goes about 1.5 miles per trip. what we're seeing with the individually owned e-bikes is that they're going about 3.3, so just over twice as far per trip. And again, I think people are coming into downtown. I don't think they're necessarily competing with each other. I think they're kind of two different use cases that we see. I think there's a great example I like to use is that for myself, I really enjoy riding my e-bike downtown that I own, but then sometimes when I'm going around downtown, it's much easier to just use the shared micromobility going around downtown rather than using my own e-bike. And so program's about to relaunch next week. We're really excited to keep it going and see what happens in 2023. We did make some tweaks to the program. I won't dive into those too much because I know we are coming up on time, and just wanted to end with some pictures of some of our happy customers, people who've redeemed and are using their e-bikes today. So I'll pause there. I know we have hopefully a little bit of time, not really for questions, but I'm happy to have conversations offline too.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Mike. And we had a really jam-packed hour, and I'm very thankful for all the information that all panelists have shared. So before we conclude today, I think I'll just ask one quick question, just a quick roundtable and with some quick answers here. But to all panelists, what is one thing you learned from other panelists today that maybe you'd like to take home to your own communities?
I guess I can start. And for me, I'd say what I really appreciated hearing from Alyssa, Mary, and Mike is really just how much focus there is on creating a lot of these mode shift discussions and really setting the bar high in order to actually achieve that. And I'm really excited about that and what that might entail for our cities to come.
Thank you. Alyssa, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I and the comments lend itself to this as well in the chat, is really looking at the other cities and the use of the bike, shared bike facilities and the shared bike system. That's some place that in San Diego, we haven't really reached back. We used to have a docked bike system here, and that wasn't the right fit for us. But how do we use dockless better, and how do we maybe even find opportunities for docked bikes here in the city in the right locations, and what that looks like. So we'll definitely be looking to the other cities for those ideas and models. Thank you.
Mary or Mike, whoever wants to.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just say each city is using data differently to inform how they build out their programs. And I think that's exactly what we need to be doing. It's not going to be a one size fits all, and need to continue to adapt and make tough choices, even if it means we've already invested lots of money into programs if they're not quite working the way we need them to.
I'll just say, real quickly, I think that I mentioned it, the point Mary made, I think it's not, Denver's had a lot of great success with our e-bike incentive, but it's not just a Denver thing, with what Mary was talking about with the demand, 19,000 applications for just a few hundred bikes. Like, people really want and are really interested in these types of mobility options. And so there's a large demand, and I think it's part of our role is how do we figure out how to scale available funding, available programs to meet that demand. So it's not just a Denver or Chicago thing. I think it's across the country. People really want to see these options and use these options. If we can help facilitate that, that'd be a good win for us.
Okay. Well, first off, I want to thank all attendees for participating today, and for all panelists for really the amazing level of information that you shared. And we do plan, we really first off also want to thank you all for the questions that all attendees have submitted. We're going to try to go through the list that we have here and try to get back with some responses when we post the recording of this on our website. So we'll try our best to attend to that. On top of that, I also want to invite everyone to attend the National Shared Mobility Summit on May 2nd through 4th here in Chicago. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to summit.sharedusemobilitycenter.org. And we're going to have lots of great discussions just like these. And so I think it'll be a great opportunity to meet people and to learn from people in the industry working on micromobility, but also other important topics. So again, thank you all. And thank you, Mike, Alyssa, Mary, and Tejus. And please feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any questions about anything you learned today. And we hope to keep the conversation going. So thank you all. Take care.
Thank you.